Joe Biden always calls himself a self-declared Zionist. What does Zionism mean according to you?
This is a big question because I rarely even use the term Zionist because it has so many meanings to so many different people. So usually if someone asks me, am I a Zionist? I will say, well, what do you mean by that? Because I might be, depending on your definition, or I might not be. Loosest definition would be that you believe that the Jews have a right to a state. Then above that, maybe you think you have a right to a state in the land that is Israel, Palestine. And then even, most extreme is you believe you have a right to a state there, that it's promised to you by God, and that the inhabitants there have no right to it.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's good evening, good nightish in India. It's very, very early good morning in US. And this is Middle East Insights. My name is Dr. Shubhda Chaudhary, and today we are with a very esteemed guest who I will just give one line of introduction, but he'll speak more about him during the course of our podcast. And we are going to talk about the shifts in US foreign policy after October 7, 2023. And with this, I would like to welcome Max Segal, who is an ardent policy analyst at International Peace Consultancy and also a cat lover like me. So with this, sir, welcome so much to our platform.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And sir, my first question is that can you tell us more about your background and how professionally, personally, this question that we are going to deal with as an American, as an analyst, how is it different for you?
Yeah, so I got my start in politics working on Capitol Hill as an intern for a congressman named Juan Vargas from California. He sits on the Middle East subcommittee of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and he is staunchly pro-Israel, one of the most pro-Israel, AIPAC-supported members of Congress. And it was an educational experience. This was right around the time that the Iran deal was beginning to be negotiated, and he, to his credit, was willing to engage in discussions with his interns about it, but you could not reason with him. You could not explain that there was any course of action that might head off basically a war with Iran. And he was so rigid about it, and was so out of step with his other policies. He's in the Congressional Progressive Caucus. That it was really just an eye-opening experience. Like, what is going on? What can possibly explain this? And I think that the answer is that AIPAC and other pro-Israel lobbies really have had for a long time a lock on the issue on Capitol Hill. There is no cost to being pro-Israel. certainly not in the Republican Party, but very little has there been until recently in the Democratic Party. And it's all benefit. All you have to do is sign the bills. You don't really think about it. There's no counterbalance to this pro-Israel lobby. So there was an attempt to create one, and there have been attempts. And that's actually my background. It's with an organization called the Jewish Peace Lobby, which was founded around 1989. And that was supposed to be the alternative voice for American Jews on Israel. It was supposed to send the message that not all American Jews are lockstep behind AIPAC. And in fact, many of us aren't. And certainly that's my orientation. And over the years, they had some effective campaigns. They were a membership organization. But still, you couldn't really counterbalance AIPAC, and you really couldn't get anything done through Washington. So that's kind of where the Jewish Peace Lobby sort of trailed off and became it's essentially dormant now and has turned into the International Peace Consultancy, which is a group of activists, analysts based in both the West Bank, in Ramallah, in New York, engaging with the United Nations, and here in DC and elsewhere in the U.S. Coming from the Jewish Peace Lobby, former International Crisis Group people, all coming together to try to strategize basically how can the Palestinians find a way forward on statehood in the absence of not only an Israeli partner, but a interested American government in promoting a two-state solution or promoting statehood. So that's what I do now. In the interim, I worked on the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2020. I worked on the Nevada campaign, which was, if you recall, that was our one big success, is our last big success. It was incredible. It was, one of the proudest times of my life, winning that. And then it was basically crushing what happened after that, which is that, within a month, the campaign was essentially over. Obama had pressured all the other moderate candidates to coalesce around Joe Biden. And then the pandemic hit and everything locked down. And this is really a kind of wake-up call as to exactly how much work the progressives and the left has to do in the U.S. That we may have a lot of popular support for some of our policies, but it hasn't broken through into the democratic machine that really dictates policy, including on foreign policy.
So that is why one thing which got my attention was that why, again, I don't want to buy into the rhetoric of binaries, but at what age, as an American Jew, as an activist, or as an analyst, you started differentiating from what is the normal, the rhetoric which is instilled by Israeli state?
Yeah. It's been a process. Probably I still buy into some aspects of it. I mean, I've, found myself over the last year, just becoming more critically thinking, more self-aware about, things that I was repeating without really thinking about it, even though I already thought that I had been. But I would say actually for someone like myself, a fairly secular, liberal American Jew, culturally Jewish, like had a bar mitzvah, have family in Israel, but not not super orthodox and not ardently Zionist in the sense that I think that they have a right to that land regardless of the inhabitants of it or anything like that. I think actually this is the predominant view for American Jews is not as aligned with the Israeli government and more aligned with groups like J Street that really represent I'd say I don't know 3/4 of American Jews. For me personally, it's always been somewhat of my orientation. My parents both met as peace activists. They actually, I should say my dad founded the Jewish Peace Lobby. It's his organization, and my mom was on the board of it, early on, and they both were very engaged in the efforts in the 80s to, begin meeting with the PLO when they were still in Tunis, and to bridge the gap between the Jewish community and the Palestinians, and begin to bring them out of the cold, as it were.
Yeah, that's actually very, it's very surreal. Because what happened with me over the period of time was there was the binary thinking, which was very strong, that Jews, Arabs. And I was also, not able to see the various intricacies or differences within the binary. And I was able to see it only when I went to Ramallah and West Bank specifically. And I saw so many different fragilities within Palestinian uh, community too. And then slowly and slowly, I started making Jewish friends. And that was a very, like, I don't know much about Talmud and I don't know much about Mishnah and Torah, but a bit about Moses. And um, it really helped me in unlearning and a certain kind of catharsis. Because the kind of propaganda is always, the binary is very toxic.
So, what was the propaganda that you say that you were receiving initially? Was it more pro-Palestine or more pro-Israel, or?
We had the propaganda was like we had a professor in our university who used to teach about Israel, but he never used to talk about occupation.
Mm.
And that was something which made me very difficult to, one of the best professors actually. But it made me very difficult to accept whatever he was saying, and it painted him in a very black and white picture in my head. But I guess if he would have kept it in a more balanced perspective to all of us, then we would have also started seeing Israeli civilians in a different light, Israeli state in a different light, Jews in different, diaspora communities in a different light, instead of labeling everyone as a Zionist.
Mm.
That was something,
Yeah.
had to be done at the right time, which was not sadly done. And the
Yeah.
perspective from Israel, that also was lacking, because if one particular person is pushing a propaganda, then everyone is fighting against it. And then, that is a certain kind of misinformation then which is going forward. We don't know. And all of us are sitting in India. So we really don't know. So that was there. So my next question to you is that, so what happened on October 7th is what I'll call it as it happened. Hamas assassinated more than 1,200 innocent Israelis. 200 of them or more were the hostages. A prison deal took place in the beginning, but then it was blocked. And we don't know where the missing hostages are right now. A lot of family members of the hostage who are still not back, they are going through the trauma of their own. And the Israeli state is not really Israeli state here, I mean completely. Netanyahu is not actually looking into it, and he has started a 7-front war. Uh, Over the period of time, the government of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have been supplying arms. Nikki Haley has been writing messages on those arms. And these are going to create massive death in Gaza, even in West Bank. Uh, so my question to you is that what, how did October 7 unfold for you personally?
I would say it unfolded with me just completely glued to my screen. I couldn't take my eyes away of what I was watching. It was so stunning. Um, I never expected anything like this to ever happen. Um, I thought for sure that if there's one thing that Israel would never let happen, it would be for Hamas to break through this, border fence wall that they've constructed. And I never thought that they'd be so overwhelmed. I I never doubted that Hamas, if they had the opportunity, might try to do something like this. Um, but I was shocked. I was shocked. I was scared for everyone in those communities, sickened by the images, knew that, this was going to be the start of a war, was already scared of the response. At the same time, I do have family in Israel, so I'm making sure, or, via my mom and my dad, that our family is okay, reaching out to some, colleagues, former colleagues, and everyone says, we're okay, but like we're in shock. We've never seen anything like this. And I mean, my initial response was, after kind of processing what had happened, was that, yeah, there is I'm a peace activist, but I wouldn't say that I'm a pacifist, absolutely. And that there is a just hypothetical operation that Israel could wage if they wanted to get the hostages back or, secure their border or something, limited like that. But history shows us that ultimately these conflicts always end in some massive hostage prisoner swap. We recall the Gilad Shalit deal, where it was, one Israeli soldier exchanged for like 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. And my thought was, look, we know that this is how this is going to end. Why not just do that now and spare the bloodshed and deal with Hamas after? That the priority really should be the hostages. And that was, I didn't think that it would happen, but I wish that it would. And as you say, the hostages have not been the priority for Netanyahu. Netanyahu's priority is himself, frankly. He is trying to stay in office. He hopes to avoid prosecution for corruption that he's, being investigated for. And he knows that as soon as the war ends, that's when his coalition could fall apart, or that's when new elections could have to happen, and he wants to be in the best place possible politically when that happens. So everything from the way that they've waged the war, deprioritizing the hostages, going in and out as opposed to like seizing territory and holding it and building on it, has been, I think, a way of making sure that this war doesn't end too quickly. That's been Netanyahu's objective. And this may be changing. Trump now has made very clear to Netanyahu that he wants this wrapped up before he gets into office. Of course, Biden said that he wanted it wrapped up as well, and didn't have the same sway with Netanyahu. But Netanyahu is doing better in the polls now than he was before. No one is any longer saying October 7th means the end of Netanyahu. He can never recover from this. That's a distant memory. And perversely, if we want the war to end, the thing that we really have to root for, I think, are for Netanyahu's poll numbers to rise. And I say that as no fan of Netanyahu. I just don't think that he's going to end this war until it's in his political interest. But he's starting to do things that could be signals that he's winding it down. He's started to reach out to hostage families. He's engaging with them more. He's talking about the hostages more. Trump is talking about the hostages. I think that they've made it's clear in their mind that they can't end the war until they get the hostages back. I still think that, by the way, is false. Of course, you can negotiate a swap without a war going on. But at least it's more in tune with the Israeli public and a more legitimate demand than this idea that we're going to eradicate Hamas and no, we won't accept any other Palestinian entity to take over either. And it's just, basically indefinite war in Gaza.
That makes like sense. For example, if I would have been an Israeli, like a citizen who has very limited interaction with Arabs, Israeli Arabs, or even with the Palestinians, and after 7th of October, if I would have seen that my leader has assassinated Nasrallah, my leader has assassinated Yahya Sinwar, my perspective, no matter how many corruption deals are against him, would sway. Because look, he assassinated Nasrallah. Look, he assassinated Ismail Haniyeh. Look, he assassinated Yahya Sinwar. We are comparatively safer. But then again, the cognitive dissonance is that we are never safe till the entire crisis, because it's a never-ending catastrophe.
Right. That's exactly right. I mean, from one perspective, they are safer today than they were, pre-October 7th. Hezbollah has been greatly diminished. Hamas is decimated. These leaders, as you say, have all been taken out. The axis of resistance, Iran and their aligned groups, is no longer functioning on this, attack against one is an attack against all logic. After the Lebanon ceasefire, Hezbollah is no longer linking their war with Israel to Hamas's war. So in some perspective, they are safer, but it's like, at what cost? Because it's not just, I don't blame anyone who's in a conflict and thinking about their own security, but it's like the price that Israel has inflicted on the Palestinians and the Lebanese so greatly outstrips what could possibly be considered, appropriate within, self-defense, or trying to get their hostages back, or whatever other rationale you want to give for it. And that's where the American administration and other friendly countries really had to say enough is enough. But and I don't know if that would have worked. I don't know if Israel would have been restrained. Netanyahu, as we said, had his own logic, but at least we wouldn't be as complicit in what's happening, because it's not just Israel's war. It really is our war. And I would say personally, I've been to the West Bank several times. I was last visiting there in 2022, and I can't imagine going back there while this war is going on. I feel ashamed. I've always felt extremely welcome there. I don't know. I mean, what is the atmosphere going to be towards me? How can I come there and you know talk to them about like, well, maybe you should compromise on this, moderate on that while this is going on. It it's a disaster. I mean, it is a disaster on all levels, and I think everyone in the peace community has felt it very personally.
Yeah, no, it's actually very, it will be traumatic actually for you also at personal and professional levels to go back if there is a time in future where activists and academics can go back to West Bank. Gaza, I don't think so, is happening.
Yeah.
Gaza is not happening anytime sooner. And one thing which I wanted to ask you is that Joe Biden always calls himself a self-declared Zionist. What does Zionism mean according to you?
Ooh, this is a big question because, yeah, I mean, it's like, so I rarely even use the term Zionist because it has so many meanings to so many different people. So usually if someone asks me, am I a Zionist? I will say, well, what do you mean by that? Because I might be, depending on your definition, or I might not be. Um, I would say the loosest definition would be that you believe that the Jews have a right to a state. Um, then above that, maybe you think you have a right to a state in the land that is Israel, Palestine. And then even most extreme is you believe you have a right to a state there, that it's promised to you by God, and that uh, the inhabitants there have no right to it, and nothing can stand in your way. Um, Certainly don't subscribe to the last notion. I'm sympathetic to the second one, that they have a right to the state there, because I don't think that there was plausibly another place for them to go after, certainly after World War II. And but I'm not sympathetic to the idea that they can have a state at the expense of the native population that's there at all. So I guess I'm in the liberal Zionist. If I am a Zionist, it would be in the liberal Zionist camp.
What exactly is anti-Semitism?
Yeah, anti-Semitism. It's not anti-Zionism. It's not being anti-Israel. I think it is, simply put, racism and discrimination against Jewish people for being Jewish, and that it doesn't need to be held in a separate category as other forms of bigotry, and that's basically what it means to me. I don't think that it's right to define it as to define certain criticisms of Israel as anti-Semitism. To me, that is a conflation and a way of censoring and keeping people from really being able to voice their opinions on Israel.
So, during your professional career, has it ever happened that you have been cornered or silenced um, because of your views in US specifically? I don't know what happens after
Yeah,
Trump comes.
I don't think it's happened to me. My views are fairly moderate. You know, I guess I'm mostly a two-state solution person, mostly because I think that it's the one solution that possibly there could be some agreement on. But I would support whatever Israelis and Palestinians can agree to, as long as it has some hope of lasting, and it has some popular democratic legitimacy, and it's not just leader to leader going to try to impose this on their people, because that won't last.
Yeah.
So my views are basically mainstream, I would say. So no, I haven't really experienced much censorship.
That's really, it's very empowering, that because mostly when the spiral of silence starts in majoritarian cultures, then it becomes very difficult to even voice your own truth, even if you come from that culture, even if you come from those roots. And then you are cornered by your own culture first, and then the outsiders. So the next question is basically from Shalaka. She's a student of our Israel-Palestine course, and she's asking that how does the Biden administration's response to October 7 events play into the 2024 US presidential elections and public opinion? Like, how did it actually, he's called as Genocidal Joe for a reason, but...
Yeah, it's a good question. It was the subject of a lot of discussion in the lead up to the election, even during the primaries. If you recall, there was a movement called the Uncommitted Movement for voters in Michigan and some other swing states to, instead of voting for Joe Biden in the Democratic primary, even if, he may have been like one of, maybe he's the only Democratic candidate on the ballot in some state, or he's one of a couple. Instead of voting for him, they would write down uncommitted. And it was to have their voices registered as opposing the war, opposing Biden administration policy on Gaza. It was saying, look, we're Democrats. We want to support you. But we want you to know that this is important to us and we need a policy change. And they were, I would say, noticed, but not respected or taken seriously by the Democratic Party or by the White House or the Biden campaign, or even finally the Harris campaign. The assumption had been that, first of all, there were not enough voters who cared about this one issue on the pro-Palestine side to swing the election decisively. And secondly, that the voters who really did care about this were unwinnable, that it was either they were demanding something that was too much, like that the Biden administration imposed an arms embargo or cut off all aid to Israel, which, I think to most of the world sounds fairly reasonable, but in the US is like, the third rail. It's kind of unthinkable that we would ever do something like this. And certainly it wasn't within the realm of possibilities that the Biden administration would do. So they're considered as basically unwinnable and therefore not really worth courting. That was foolish because it could have been a very slim margin. It could have, an election like this can always come down to one vote in one state. So you do need every vote. As it happened, the margin for Trump was so overwhelming that there's not a single state in which you can say, look, it was the Arab American community or it was the Muslim community, the pro-Palestine folks who decided this election decisively, against Harris for Trump. In a way, I am relieved by this. I think that the blowback that that community would have faced for being seen as delivering the election to Trump would have been severe. And I don't think that the message would have come across necessarily that, the Democrats need to pay more attention to this community. I think that instead Democrats, knowing the party, at least as I understand it, would double down on their priors and say, this community is unwinnable. Forget about them. let's try to compete for votes elsewhere, compete for votes in the middle. So in the end, this election was decided by many different factors, many different demographic groups. It's hard to pinpoint any one that decided the election, but for sure, this is a record low for Democrats with the Arab American community, and record highs for Republicans, at least in recent memory, and for Trump. There was a huge swing, and you see it in the proportions, and the proportions really look as though the Arab American community switched from Biden, switched from Harris to Trump. I think that looking at that can be a bit misleading. Actually, what it is that a lot of Arab Americans and Muslims and people who cared about Palestine said, to hell with it, I'm not voting in this election, or I'm voting, but I'm not voting for president. So they're not counted in the proportions, but actually probably the raw numbers still favor Democrats. I think at the end of the day, Democrats still have a big shot at winning back the Arab American community. There hasn't been a wholesale shift.
Yeah. And as an outsider, I think this election was more about economics. Because as an outsider, I see, look, the impact of the pandemic on the US economy, on most of the economies, along with the corruption, nepotism that is there in all the economies. But the cost of living, the mortgage rate, the real estate prices, the price of putting food on the table, that was a domestic issue which was more personal than what is happening in Israel and Palestine. I think, as an outsider, that was a more personal issue because the cost of products in US have become very expensive over the past 3 to 4 years.
Absolutely, the inflation is real. I don't think that the Biden administration, did a good job of acknowledging the pain that many Americans were going through in that regard. You can't exactly tell someone, actually things aren't so expensive because look at this economic indicator or that economic indicator. You have to acknowledge how people are feeling. That said, I still believe that the economic platform that Biden was offering, or the Democrats are offering, in this election and in general, is more to the advantage of people who are feeling the pinch from, groceries or gas prices, for the working class, the middle class, more to their advantage than the policies of Republicans like Trump, who want to, cut taxes on the wealthy, gut all kinds of social programs, while also driving up the debt with these mass deportations and the military budget. But I think what that shows is that people are willing to vote against their class interests, and we should have known that. Democrats should have known that because we do it ourselves. We're a party that has largely been reliant on upper income, upper middle class folks who say, look, we are willing to pay a higher tax rate because we think that that's right. And by the same measure, you can be a working class, low income individual, and you can say, look, I think these tariffs are worth it because, we've got to get tough on China, or I think that, these policies are worth it because I support these other policies that Trump supports. So the economics, are always there, especially when it's an incumbent. It's always hard to be the incumbent when the economy is not feeling great. but we really lost with basically we the Democrats lost with just about every demographic group. So yeah, I'd say is multi-determined.
Yeah, yeah. And Biden, anyway, 2 days back was seen buying this Rashid Khalidi's book, 100-Year War on Palestine. And Rashid Khalidi's son tweeted that, take off that book.
I saw this. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, people were
yeah,
speculating like, did some staffer, sneak it in? Like, did he
yeah,
know? I think Biden has met Holiday and recognized who he was, but it's like should have read this, a year ago. Yeah,
yeah. I was like, better late than never.
right.
Yeah, that is my perspective. I hope he reads it, and it was just not a paparazzi attempt of, planting
Yeah,
it.
I mean, I think it was honestly, I don't think that he meant to like show it to the cameras or anything because what kind of message is he even sending there?
Yeah,
Um,
but as usual, he doesn't know it. And he
yeah.
doesn't know that he doesn't know it. But anyway, our next question is from our student Prashant Bisht. He's asking, do you believe the current Israeli government has no moral compass whatsoever when they purposefully spread fake news? One like when they said there were 400 million US dollars of Nasrallah under a Lebanon hospital just to create chaos among the patients.
Um,
Um,
I mean, I find this current Israeli government, many of the ministers, abhorrent. Their views, their statements, their policies. Um, I think that they have a moral compass, but it's not pointing in the same direction as ours. It's saying that the ends justify the means, and the ends are all of greater Israel for the Jews and only the Jews. This is the most extreme government that Israel has had. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the worst policies that we've ever seen from Israel are happening under this government.
Yeah, I mean, like, in terms of, to be very honest, misinformation is spread by everyone involved in the conflict. So it's not just propaganda which is being spread by Israel, it's also propaganda which was spread by Hamas. So it's a very multi-dimensional level of misinformation. Say, for example, right now, what is happening in Syria, there's so much of propaganda spreading from so many accounts. So you don't know. There are pictures and videos from 2016 which are circulating as if it's 2024. We don't know. So it's not just what I would ask my student is that don't fixate on just one side doing it. And because if you do that, then even if that side is guilty, you are somehow not taking into account the various other actors who are doing the same. Everyone, every proxy group, every regional actor does it. And
That's
also
true.
because, yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's every it's Hezbollah also does it. Like for example, when the Lebanese Israel ceasefire, so the social media half of it, we won. Israelis were like, we won. Hezbollah was like, we won. And there's so much of, videos and footage to support that. But I was like, both of you lost.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
it's
Right.
no one won.
They both lost, and yet to have any kind of ceasefire, you often need a you know um, dueling victory narratives for both sides to be able to claim it as some kind of a win. So it's
Yeah.
almost yeah, you can see the spin, but it's like okay, it's good that they're spinning because if they weren't, then they'd still be thinking that they have to keep fighting.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's like, thankfully, those who are, good at AI detection and fake news, they're able to detect it. But for the common public, it's like misinformation. We just don't know. Fayaz Mehndi, our volunteer with Middle East Insights, he's asking, sir, that given the dramatic escalation in the Middle East following October 7, how do you see the US balancing its traditional alliances, such as with Israel, while navigating the broader strategic objectives in the region, including relations with emerging powers and addressing humanitarian concerns? So, for example, how do you see that now with Israel? For Trump, it's easy, but um, How will they manage all the other actors like the Gulf, the Levant, the North African? How are they going to manage all of it? Because Biden must have thought, like just a few days back, that one ceasefire is done and now Syria.
Yeah.
So,
It I don't know. It's the Middle East has never been, in my experience, more unpredictable, more interconnected, unstable than it is right now. And frankly, I think that the Trump administration doesn't really get what they're getting themselves into. I think that they bought into their own hype a little bit. About the relative stability and relative peace that existed during their administration. They think that was really their doing and their genius. And actually, I think that they got quite lucky, and that they set a lot of the seeds of division that really came to fruition during the Biden administration. I think that they don't have a coherent Middle East policy. Not that necessarily Biden did, but I think that they're going to try to treat every situation differently and work very transactionally. Yeah. So, this is our relationship with the Saudis. This is our relationship with the UAE. They shouldn't be connected in any way. They I think we'll try to expand the Abraham Accords. I don't expect them to have success with that unless there's a complete change in the Israeli government and an end to the war. And I don't see that happening in the next couple of years. The alliance with Israel, they will, it's honestly, it's going to be easier for them to manage than the Biden administration, because they don't even make any claims towards, humanitarian concerns or human rights. There's not this huge hypocrisy in them sending arms to Israel, at least on the moral level, that there was, this gap between the Biden administration's rhetoric and their actions. And within the Republican Party, Israel is still given a revered status. They will for sure cut aid to Ukraine. That will happen. But they would cut all the aid to Ukraine before they start cutting aid to Israel. So that's where that stands.
Yeah, one thing which, there were two predictions which I had made, which was, one prediction was that he's going to select his, so Tiffany, Trump's daughter, married Lebanese American. His father is Massad Bulus. And Massad Bulus yesterday was made the head of the Arab Affairs, Middle Eastern Affairs by Trump, if he comes into, when he comes into office. So that was my first prediction, that he's a billionaire. He's invested so much in the Trump campaign, and along with Shirlene Anderson and the wife of Sheldon Anderson.
Yeah, Miriam
Anderson, yes. Sorry. And so I was there. So Miriam Anderson, Massad Bulus, and others. And Tulsi Gabbard, Mark Rubio, mostly bought by IPAC. So these were expected. And then my second prediction is that Trump and Elon Musk are going to have a fight in the future. They both are egomaniacs.
Yeah. So I'm interested. Were you familiar with Massad Bulus before he got involved with Trump? Because I had never even really heard of him, but he seems to know everyone in the region.
No, I came to know because I keep talking with, specifically till last month I didn't know, but I keep talking with a lot of indigenous activists and experts. So one of them said that having a Lebanese son-in-law will not work, and I'm like, how did Jared Kushner become Lebanese? And then I researched about Massad Bulus, that what is this who is this guy? And then I was expecting that he's going to get a very prominent position in the cabinet, which was
I
not.
would I would say that the reception to Mossad Boulos among people who care about Israel Palestine, I mean people who want a more balanced policy, it is optimistic, hopeful, maybe is a better word, because he's the first appointee that is remotely would be assumed to be remotely critical of Israeli policy. When you would compare him to, say, Mike Huckabee or Pete Hegseth, who's been appointed or nominated to be the Secretary of Defense, Mike Waltz, Trump's national security advisor. We know that Trump tends to make decisions basically with a lot of weight given to the most recent conversations that he's had, and we can assume that he's going to be able to have direct conversations with Mossad Boulos, or that Mossad's going to be able to have direct conversations with Trump in a way that someone else with the same position who didn't have that kind of personal relationship might not be. So I would say that he may be talking to Trump a lot more than someone like Huckabee, who will probably be talking to the Israelis a lot more than to the Americans.
And I also think that Israel, or maybe even the Trump government, is going to bring back Mohammed Dahlan, who in 2013, I think he had to leave Ramallah. He's completely an opponent he's a Palestinian leader, actually, member of the Fatah party. Then he went and settled after 2013-11 in UAE. And he's the man behind the Abraham Accords. Mostly.
Interesting. So I hadn't heard that he was behind the Abraham Accords, but he certainly is playing a role currently. Yeah. He still has a lot of loyalists in Gaza, and he's got a humanitarian aid distribution network that I believe his wife is in charge of, like a nonprofit. So they are in charge of delivering some of this aid that's going there, and he's trying to be, I think, a kingmaker. I don't think that he is ready to come back personally, but like I'd say the candidate that he's backing is this guy Nasser Al-Kidwa, who's Yasser Arafat's nephew. Yeah. So he's strongly backed by Dahlan. Dahlan for sure would like to play a role again. I think if the Palestinian Authority is not allowed back in some form to Gaza, and they start turning to, what other kind of mini governments can we set up there? Then that's where Dahlan and his men really come into play.
And he's scary. I'm not scared of, I was never scared of Sinwar. I was never scared of Nasrallah, but I'm very scared of Dahlan. It's like he's like a ghost. It's just like Yusidin's Bashar al-Assad's younger brother, Maher al-Assad, who is the head of the military intelligence unit, and he's the ghost. And no one is afraid of Bashar al-Assad. He doesn't even call the shots. His younger brother is there's that kind of...
Dahlan was the head of the security services in Gaza for a long time, and he built up a well-deserved reputation for being terrifying, like you say.
Yeah. Some Moitrio Sarkar is asking two questions, and how does one make sense of these two things together? The American military-industrial complex and its contribution to the Israeli offensive. The American military-industrial complex and the deep state. Martin Lockheed's one share is $650 or more.
So he's asking, what is the role of it in?
And then how is the American government, on one hand, So on one hand, so the cognitive dissonance is that on one hand, the American military industrial complex is making a lot of money by supplying arms to Israel or
Mhm.
to even the Gulf countries and all of it. And on the other hand, the same American government is then trying to be a peace mediator.
Right. Well, I think the answer is you see that we're a much more effective arms supplier than we are a peacemaker, because these two things, uh, don't go very well together, and they do create opposing incentives. So when there's a bill like the Bernie Sanders legislation to ban offensive weapon sales to Israel, it's not just the pro-Israel lobbies that are whipping against it, but it would also be, arms suppliers and their lobbyists, their people on the Hill who are opposed to this. It is very rare for us to actually get legislation through Congress to cut off any kind of military supplies to anyone, in large part because of how powerful the military industrial complex is,
Yes.
and that these things become self-perpetuating. So it's like, Biden talks about, when he came into office, he was talking about this foreign policy for the middle class, this kind of elastic term that could really mean anything. But one of the things that it could certainly mean is, well, the steel for this weaponry is built in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and if we cut off arms sales to Israel, then that's going to cost jobs in Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania is a swing state, so we can't do that. And it's these kind of pressures that will come into play. So it takes a lot, and it's rare. We did have at the very beginning of the Biden administration, I think we did successfully cut off offensive weapon sales to Saudi Arabia for use against Yemen. In retrospect, it's unclear exactly what that meant. We never got a very clear definition on what, offensive versus defensive weapons are. And as people in the Bernie world have pointed out, the irony is that, for years they were trying to figure out what is this distinction. And then finally, Sanders introduces this bill to cut off basically the same thing, cut off offensive weapon supplies, but to Israel for use in Gaza. And the administration's defense against that, their way of pushing back against that was, this is a false distinction, actually. There is no difference between offensive and defensive weapons. And it's like, oh, finally. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned. Frankly, for progressives, it's to not take people at face value, and find ways to hold even your allies accountable once they're in office.
Yeah, I mean, like the gun lobby there is so strong. Even for domestic issues, there's so much of mass shooting that happens. And in spite of that, there have been few laws that, okay, 18 plus, or you have to show your ID card, or you'll get this after 7 days, or whatever, and state-wise different legislation. But it's still there. You can still get a gun in US. So that is a industry which is not only for external actors, but even for internal. The military industrial complex is working for, it doesn't care about the trauma faced by the children. Maximum school shootings take place there.
I think, yeah, this is a good point. And I mean, there are often these clashes between, what is actually, we would think, in our interests and what we say we care about, like preventing mass shootings or peace in the Middle East, and where we're actually putting our money and what policies we're promoting. I would say one difference in the Trump administration to expect from the Biden administration is that they will care a lot less about the kind of rhetorical gloss that they put on these policies. Trump is much more willing to say, well, look, we can't cut off weapon sales to wherever, UAE, because I need those votes in Michigan, or like I need those votes somewhere else, and like they build the weapons there. He's much more transactional and kind of
Yes.
willing to take back the veil, which I
Yeah.
think is helpful in some way, but in the other way, it's like it does normalize on a kind of moral level, standards that I think are wrong. That oh well, peace and human rights,
Like
to hell with it. Like, yeah.
You know what is happening in India right now? Most of the students who study, the Indian students in the F1 visa, who are studying in US, the school administration of few of the universities has said that come back before Trump gets into office, because then the immigration process will be something, and the students are panicking because they are here for the winter break, and they're like, we have to get back before 20th of January, and it's causing a news.
Oh yeah.
It's massive. And yesterday he said that against BRICS having their own currency, and the tweet something read as, I'm paraphrasing, but he used the word that the BRICS countries can find another sucker. US is not going to be, completely quiet. And I was like, yes, the truth.
I mean, it's like Trump, and it's not just a Trump problem, but I would say Republicans are probably the more sanctions happy party than Democrats. And it's like there's only so many countries that you can try to isolate before, and cut off from the U.S. financial system and the U.S. dollar, before they start doing things like trying to find their own currencies. And we see the U.S. trying to isolate Iran, North Korea, Russia, China. And it's like, if you tell enough people to go into the corner, suddenly they're all together and they can trade with each other, and the sanctions become ineffective. So I think that, Trump really has to, what I would like to see is for him to adopt policies, a grand strategy that tries to combat this kind of block formation that is going on right now. I think, in theory, everyone understands, well, you don't want all your enemies or adversaries to be together. But yet, we keep promoting policies, namely sanctions, but also tariffs, to some degree, that will push people together and cause them to,
100% tariff on BRICS. It's like, what does it even mean? So yesterday's tweet, day before, was hilarious, but I'm glad that he's back on Twitter and Truth Social. He'll be like multiple places. He's going to be there for us.
I'm glad that he's back on social media.
Yeah. Like, at least, all the time he'll be like tweeting and telling us what's in his mind. The next question is, Gorang is asking that, was the ceasefire called as Trump's victory in US?
Was it? Sorry?
The Israel-Lebanon ceasefire called as Trump's victory, because we see it as the legacy of Joe Biden.
So the Lebanon ceasefire.
Yeah.
It's an interesting, I think that certainly the Trump people are taking credit for causing it to happen. They're saying that it was, because Trump is coming into office, that this is happening. Trump is saying, I want the war to wind down. I think that, honestly, like that could be one reason. It's certainly not really being seen as a diplomatic achievement for Biden, except by people just in the Biden circle, because it's like, well, this was what you you said you were trying to prevent this whole time. You're trying to prevent the regional war. So yes, you cleaned up, what to some extent is your own mess, but it's like this whole thing really could have been avoided, or you could have at least tried to avoid it by ending the war in Gaza, in any of the, 10, 11 months that preceded the expansion to Lebanon.
Yeah, it's I don't know, when he came to the Rose Garden to give the speech. So it was very funny that there's a Lebanon-Israeli ceasefire. We are waiting for an American president to speak who is 45 minutes late. And everyone was like, did the ceasefire not go through? What happened? So that was some kind of thing. The last question is, in simple words, do you really think that Israel didn't know about the October 7 attack with the kind of military intelligence? And I'm not saying Mossad is ubiquitous or CIA is ubiquitous, but Prashant Bhisht is basically asking that do you believe that the Israeli government had an idea and then used it according to their own leverage or allowed it to happen?
I think that there were certainly warnings that's
Yeah.
been widely reported, and I'm sure that there's much more that we don't know. But Netanyahu has prevented serious state inquiry into October 7th, and this is something that will probably happen once he's out of office because it'll be so damning for him. I think that really what happened is that they got these warnings and they simply didn't believe them because they were so ideologically kind of committed to this notion that Hamas doesn't want conflict, that Hamas is contained, as it were, in Gaza, and that really the Palestinians in the West Bank, in Gaza, can be treated as separate. That because Gaza has relative self-rule, that they will be content with that, and all that needs to happen is for them to have enough of an economy to not need to break out of Gaza or start a war, but that that they wouldn't do it, and it's just a total misreading of Hamas. Hamas has always said that what they're committed to. They've always said that they're committed to the total liberation, of Palestine, and there are circumstances under which they would accept something less than that. In my belief, that they would have, if a peace agreement had been negotiated by Mahmoud Abbas, the PLO, and then agreed to and then put to like a referendum. Hamas has said that they would respect the results of a referendum even if they didn't agree to it. But in the absence of that, and in the absence of any kind of political process, I mean, Hamas did not want to become, the PA of Gaza. They didn't want to be the police of the occupation, where the Israelis have withdrawn to what's thought of as the walls of the prison, essentially. At that point, it's like, what is even the point of being Hamas? And really, the end game is not Gaza. It was not Gaza for Sinwar. The end game is the West Bank. It's and the diplomatic representation that comes around the world when you are part of the PLO. So the idea was, okay, let Israel retaliate, but like Hamas will seize the initiative and be the head of Palestinian politics, and maybe the West Bank will join in. Maybe we'll destabilize it. Maybe we'll come to power through elections or otherwise. But it was a political move, and I don't think that Israel was thinking in these terms. I don't think that Israel had a idea of a scenario where Hamas might want to launch a October 7th style attack. And in fact, as we know now, it's been reported, there were not even Israeli war plans drawn up for a invasion of Gaza. Like, I think that that's the biggest sign that this wasn't, premeditated or planned in some way on the Israeli side, is that they had all these plans for how they would go into Lebanon, how they'd invade Lebanon, preparing for an October 7th style attack from Hezbollah. But for Gaza, I mean, they didn't even have troops really stationed along the border. And I guess, there is kind of a theory, maybe they let it happen. I don't think that they let it happen. I think still, as abhorrent as their policies may be, that these are people, they don't want to see their own people massacred. They're not going to just let this happen.
There's a difference between intelligence and inference. And then who exactly in the Mossad, which clerical level knew about if it had, did the seniors take it very seriously? If Egypt was telling what was the code? So there's so many questions, because it's very, like flashy and James Bond kind of, you never know what's happening. The last question is asked by Motrio Sarkar is as in America right now, because there are many protests. Trump has said that he's going to ban any kind of protest on the university campuses. And at the same time, there are a lot of, hate crimes and a lot of the distance or the division between Israelis, Palestinians is growing even wider because more and more diaspora is in US. It's much more multicultural. And apart from that, it also has people from the Gulf and from the Levant and the North African region who have sympathy for the Palestinian cause. And then there are a lot of Jews like you who have sympathy for the cause. So, what exactly is right now in the American political circle? How are the citizens feeling about Israel Palestine?
I think that everyone is feeling the effects of being in this lame duck period that we call it between the Biden and incoming Trump administrations. After or between the election where Biden loses, Harris loses, and Trump is coming in. No one is sure exactly what kind of pressure can be put politically onto the administration right now. Yes, there are protests, but it's not clear what they're going to do. People are encouraged by the fact that Trump says that he wants the war to end, and that how could Biden want a war to be his legacy? I hopefully, but I don't know. I can tell you how I'm feeling personally, which is I remember how much chaos there was when the Trump administration first came into office. And yes, there was chaos on the Israel-Palestine front, or at least there was moving the embassy and recognizing Golan Heights. I mean, these things happened at various points throughout the presidency, but that just got subsumed, within the larger chaos that comes from, well, there's a Muslim ban, or Trump is under investigation, or he's going to get impeached, or he just fired the FBI director. And I think that the Palestine protest movement was very animated against Biden, and I think potentially could be even more animated once more liberals and kind of normie Democrats feel that they have nothing to lose by actually speaking out on Palestine and on Gaza. At the same time, they'll be balancing that with protests against mass deportations, protests against everything. I mean, he's plot like Project 2025. He's going to appoint all these crazy people. It's just going to be craziness, and I think that really it will be very difficult for the Palestine movement to be in the headlines and keep the spotlight on in the same way. I think that if there is any advice I would offer, it's to focus on the issue that Trump is not promising to do anything about, which is the West Bank and settlement expansion and annexation, whether de jure or de facto, by the Israeli government, which certainly is very much on the agenda of many in the government. I think Trump will by himself want to have a ceasefire, want to wrap up the war in Gaza. It will take real pressure for him to say, oh, I also don't want annexation, and I'd also like some kind of stop on settlement expansion.
Yeah, if you can't control them, confuse them. is what he does.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he knows the spelling of annexation, but it's okay. So with this, I'm very thankful, sir, for the privilege of your time, and the personalizing your answers in such a way. It's for the first time that someone from a Jewish ancestry has spoken to us, to this batch of students who have joined right now. And for us, it's like it's a world outside, and experts like you make it much more palpable for us to believe in it. So thank you so much for really endowing, and I hope that your cat comes and disturbs you now, and so does mine. And I'm very, very thankful for the privilege of your time.
Oh, well, thank you. It was such a pleasure speaking to you. And thank you to all the students and participants for the excellent questions. I very much enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.